Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back to the DrEnderPickles show. Today I have HermeticLock on.
Hello,
Uh,
hello.
so I have a few questions for you. When and where did you find 2B2T?
Sure. It was back in 2016, and before I discovered the server, I used to play on different faction servers with my friend Deloaded, who still plays on 2B2T regularly. And we found the original Camping Rusher video and thought that it was interesting. We had been hacking on these like faction servers basically the whole time we've been playing them, and trying not to be caught and all that stuff. And so, kind of that dynamic of 2B2T really appealed to us, um, along with all the other content that was being put out. It wasn't until around July, though, that we actually began to play because the priority queue did not always exist, and it just didn't seem manageable to wait 13 hours to log into the server. So we started playing as soon as we were able to purchase priority queue, essentially.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons I really wanted to have you on was because a lot of the people that I do have on are a lot older. They started a lot they started a lot longer back, and I think it's interesting to have a different perspective from somebody who's joined and who's done a lot in the time that they have joined. Uh, and so that kind of leads to my next question. What were some of the obviously you've been in some big groups. What were some of the big groups, kind of from I guess chronologically that you've been in?
Sure. So I started off on my own for a little while. I kind of attribute my still playing the server on discovering a couple of really key bases early on when I first joined. The first of which was Dead Dreamer's robot head, which I used to gear myself up and kind of grab diamond and everything. And then I went on and found the Emerald Sand City, which is a beautiful build that was made in 2012, I believe. And Baron Dome did a video on it before it was griefed. But that's where I got alpha leaves uh, and all of that stuff. From there, I kind of was on my own. I crafted my own god set by scratch. And then I did some interesting item trades during the 1111 dupe. Um, and by inviting some people over to that base, it led to it being griefed. So what I ended up doing was going back to spawn with the gear that I had and that I had been able to dupe and keep in my ender chest and a couple of stashes nearby that base. Um, and I joined the Vortex Coalition, actually, believe it or not. And some of the most interesting times that I had in the Vortex Coalition were when we would do these like spawn operations where maybe we'd build some structures at spawn. But it wasn't so much about the things that we were doing at spawn, it was more about being together in game with a group of players that was intriguing to me because before then I had only done single player Minecraft but on 2b2t essentially. And it was interesting because I was able to find other builds and bases, but I wasn't able to interact with the community. And so what Voco kind of did was set up that foundation of being involved and more connected to the community as a whole. Um, and it was probably some of the more active days of Voco where some interesting things were being done. By the time I had left that, I had brought the Dawn Fuhrer group over to 2B2T with Deloaded. We founded the ninth Dawn Fuhrer city, which is, or it's the 10th one actually. And that's a beautiful build that's still on the archive today. But from there, after Voco, I did a couple of bases with Team Tavix, which was a smaller group at the time. And for in terms of timeline here, this is like December 2016, January 2017. And hanging out with Tavix and friends introduced me to the Fourth Reich group, which was kind of a griefing group. And so I would bring BibleBot over to different bases of monuments. I had talked to Barney Gale, who's the creator of BibleBot, and he had given me access to the account so that I could maintain it. And I'm still the owner of BibleBot today. And so I was able to kind of relate to people from the Fourth Reich, Team Tavix, and also goodwill with like Jumbo Warrior and uh, Tenaxis. And so I ended up, after some things happened with the Fourth Reich, we moved on. I went back to Spawn and I started my Spawn base. And it was fun. This is around the same time that the Highway group was forming. Think around like February 2017, and the Spawn base was a big hit in the community. Um, there were some people that didn't really understand what we were doing, but the people that did really enjoyed the whole concept of it. And so that concept eventually turned into the Spawn Masons, where I tried to bring all those different groups of players that I had interacted with together under the same, uh, group. And what I kind of took from previous groups was the importance of being together, and I wanted membership to mean something. Um, and so, anytime we welcomed a new player, we would all go out to spawn. We'd build some kind of structure. There'd be a ceremony, and it would be quite nice. And so, the key philosophy was that, the builds that we made as a group, those are all kind of superficial structures. But the core group of the spawn masons, maybe even the core structure of it, was the people and the relationships that we formed with others. And so that was kind of the philosophy and concept of that group.
Yeah, and you were talking about your spawn base, the world famous spawn base. What was creating that like, and what were some of the people that you met while you were doing that, and what kind of happened after you had built it?
Sure. So there was almost immediate notoriety there. I had some limited like attention from when Don Fuhrer was a thing, and it was just grieved. So there was a little bit of attention in the spotlight from there. But as soon as I started the spawn base, I was receiving tons of PMs of people trying to come out from basing millions of blocks out, and they were coming out because they had been playing single player with chat and they wanted to see what it was like to play with others. And so, they also didn't really care if the builds got destroyed a couple days later because they were there to interact with others, not just to purely build things. And so, some of the cool highlights of that were, Fit eventually coming by and kind of making a video on it, having more people from the Reich show up and fight there a couple of times. I think on the wiki it's mentioned that like a really large fight broke off there. They say it's the third largest in server history, but it was like 12 or 15 people at the time, which you know during those days was a lot. But now you can see that many people at 0-0 almost daily.
Yeah, and you were saying that Spawn Masons kind of formed branched off of this base. With the people that you met at this during this time. So what was that like, kind of setting up Spawn Masons and getting people in and just kind of forming the group? Because it is such a unique group.
Sure. It started off very humble. Uh, I had a conversation with Tavix in his Discord about what if we had a group at Spawn that we initiated people into. Um, and there was like some discussion about it, and people thought that it was interesting. Um, and I kind of went off and made it happen a couple of days later with my friend Jumbo Warrior. And so I built the first lodge, as you could call it, on a single player. Brought it to Spawn, and I started bringing in my friends. I initiated Jumbo Warrior. Jumbo Warrior then in turn grabbed the script that I made, and he initiated me so that I went through the same ceremony as everybody else. And the idea was, okay, let's create a group where everybody's just going to be equal. We don't really need to have a big hierarchy. Mature players don't want to deal with higher ups. It just seems like a weird concept. Because everybody, if you come into a group, you're probably bringing value to it, and you should be treated on the same level as anybody else that's in there.
Exactly, and that's why I view a lot of these modern groups as they take advantage of newer players that aren't wise to it. For whether they want the people to buy prio for them or stuff like that. It's just it's really scummy what a lot of these groups do now, that have these systems of hierarchy.
Yeah, it's just weird. And so, what we did with the Masons is we established only a couple ranks. It was you were an initiate, and then once you were initiated, you became a spawn Mason, and that was basically it. There were a couple leadership roles like worshipful, which was what I had, and that just meant I could run the meetings, initiate new players, and a couple people could be voted into those roles. But ultimately, decisions made by the group were made by the group as a whole.
Yeah, and what was it like, kind of forming the ideas for it? Destroying the base. Every time griefing your own base, stuff like that.
Sure. So there was a, kind of philosophy that I tried to put into it. And it was secret at first. I didn't really want everybody to know what it was. And maybe the thought was I could introduce more degrees into it and we could learn more about the philosophy of the Spawn Masons as you progress. But that seemed like a lot of work later. Like nobody wants to have to go through several different degrees and keep that up when you're maintaining 30 to 40 different members. It's just kind of insane.
Yeah, but I mean,
And
it
so
does add some extra dimensions to it, though. Adding that kind of stuff in makes it interesting, unique.
it definitely does. And when the Spawn Mason, we're jumping ahead in the timeline a little bit, but we need to in order to discuss the philosophy. When when the group was remade and we added like a third degree, I actually took the philosophical concepts that I began the group with and brought them into the forefront of what those degrees were. Um, and so I talked about why the Spawn Masons destroys and creates, and what the sacred numbers of the Spawn Masons are, which I can pretty much say now without any uh, obligation breaking, right? We destroy our builds after we create them. Our sacred number is 2147, which is like the abbreviation of the 32-bit integer, like the max integer that you can get in a game. And in 2b2t, when you reach that number in, let's say, maps freeze completely at that last map that you create. And only once you reach that number again are you able to create maps again. And so you've got that creation and destruction in that same number. And so the philosophy of the Spawn Masons is that we live in the middle of that creation and that destructive process. That's the gist of it.
Yeah, that is very interesting. And one of these projects that you guys worked on was the Spawn Eclipse, the symbol. What was that like? Working out the bot APIs and all that technical stuff.
It was a lot of fun. It was one of the most entertaining times I think we've had on the server. A lot of people don't realize how much planning actually went into that. We had made that smaller logo several months prior to the construction of the new one, and as a joke or as a meme, um, one of our members, I can't remember who it was, posted an image of the like of a huge Masonic eclipse over like the 100K map download, and with just the caption "win." Like he photoshopped it on top of the map with the caption "win." And then we did the math to see, okay, how many blocks would this actually take? And it's like 28 million. And we laughed it off for a little bit, but then we thought, why can't we make this happen? We've got the founder of Baritone in the group, Jerv, and I had started talking to him about how we could maybe add some integrations to do this thing. And so he started writing some custom software to take an image, and output ones and zeros. Like you take like a transparent image, and for a black pixel, you convert it to a one. For a white pixel, you convert it to a zero. divide that into sections, and then have a bot call an API. So what we did is I set up a Mongo database that we uploaded like a big PNG of the Spawn Mason logo, and it took forever because we had to design it from scratch. And nobody could agree on the design, whether we wanted like pointed tips or rounded tips, if we wanted holes in certain places. So that took a little bit of time. And then the placement of it too. We originally wanted the circle at the top of the logo to be surrounding 00, but we then we then decided that we would make the middle of the logo around 00, so it didn't look like it was hanging around an ornament. The original idea was what a flex it would be if we could wrap the whole of Spawn in the smallest part of our logo. And so we took those different sections. I think there were 2,801 of them. They were filled with about 28,000 blocks each, ones and zeros. I set up an API where you could call sections, 1-1, 0-0, 0, 23-23, right? It would return the ones and zeros. Baritone would know which sections were claimed because the API would return which players were responsible for starting which section. We kept track of the history of when they started. I rendered a map in Canvas on the website so that we could see live in real time who was doing what. And in order to gamify it, we created a leaderboard that would in real time pick up who's placing the most blocks, who's completing the most sections. And so it became kind of a fun competition in the group. But the whole of the technical accomplishment is definitely with Lejerv, who was able to refactor Baritone and create a custom client that was able to place ender chests, take out shulkers of obsidian with ender chests in them, break all the obsidian, and orchestrate the whole thing based on the API. It was really great.
Yeah, that totally flies over my head of what I can do when it comes to that kind of stuff, especially with technical Minecraft. So aside from the Eclipse, you've been a part of a bunch of different other projects. What were some really notable bases that you were a part of in your time?
Definitely all the Dawn Fuhrer bases. I really liked Smibville, which was maybe one of the highlight Spawn Mason bases that we've had. I really enjoyed being at Space Valk, Omega. Both Omegas I was a member of were really beautiful bases. It's almost hard to go back and remember it all. There were other Spawn Mason bases like Space Jam, where we were able to bring polar bears out into the end, and that was pretty interesting. Of course, the Spawn base was fun, and Cloud Club was kind of a short thing that we had for a while that was cool. But I think that probably in the middle of 2017, I was at most major notable bases. Things like Rhodes, Callisto, those kinds of things. It was a lot of fun.
And how would you say some of those bases kind of stack up to stuff we're seeing today?
It just depends, because some of the really cool things that we see today are things that existed back then, but just weren't known about. And so when you take that perspective, yes, those bases were much larger and are a little bit more cool. Smibville stacks up pretty well compared to them. There's still a Spawn Mason base that's active, that's still really spectacular. And I think that will be revealed pretty soon as well. But bases that come out today are pretty grand and spectacular, especially the ones that have been around for quite some time. I've been happy with the quality of builders I've been lucky to associate myself with.
Yeah, and that's a good lead into the next question I have for you. When it regards some of the people that you've kind of held close throughout your time, maybe some notable people that have been part of your journey per se on 2B.
Sure. One of the first major people that I met on the server was Scott Free. and he kind of took me on an adventure to the end. Gave me my first pop bob head in 2016 during the 11/11 dupe, and so he was like my first real interaction with somebody else on the server. Other than that, I got to interact with Colston and American Oreo when I was in Voco, and they were, fine people to be friends with. And then when I shifted away from Voco, that's kind of where I met the core friend group that I'm still with today. People like Bubba J, Ox22, um, those individuals, Henry and stuff. And then, it turned into the spawn base where I met Nick Has Cancer, Totorak, uh, and people like that. Eventually, I became really great friends with Negative Entropy, and he's now the owner of the Spawn Mason Discord after I stepped back, uh, which is incredibly nice. My core group of friends right now is like Turban, those same people like Bubba J, Lajerv, Ox22, UFO Crossing, a lot of the Guardsmen, which is like the new group that I've made. But I've been very privileged to be surrounded by a very small core group of friends for several years now, and the majority of them have been Spawn Masons and members that were originally a part of the Fourth Reich, and you know the Goodwill server.
Yeah, and I think that's that's very rare in Anarchy to have people that you trust and that you stick by for that long of an amount of time, because groups fall apart, people leave, stuff like that. So that is very interesting.
Yeah, and it's impossible to name everybody because there's so many people that I've been able to interact with that I'm incredibly thankful for.
Yeah, and I want to go back to something you were saying earlier before I get into some of the newer stuff you're working on. Don Fuhrer, how did you even start bringing them to the server? Like, how did you even start getting in contact with them?
Sure. So Deloaded was who I played with on faction servers before I joined 2B2T, and he's kind of the founder of Don Fuhrer. And so he and I were both, of course, hacking on other servers. And so when we joined together, we thought that it would be cool to bring the next city that he made onto 2B2T. And so that's kind of what we did.
Yeah, and how many different? I mean, were you guys on one server before, or multiple different servers?
The history of Don Fuhrer is complex and fascinating. You'd really have to bring Deloaded on to get the full history of it. It's spanned across maybe 10 different servers. This is over a period of, the entire existence of Minecraft being around, basically.
Yeah, and I want to get to another project you worked on, 2B2T Online.
Mm.
One of the biggest archives, if not the biggest, of coordinates from 2B2T. How did you start, kind of getting into that realm?
Sure. So it wasn't always mine. It started off as an oxymoron project. And he had like a really nice PHP, um, kind of basic design thing with Bootstrap. And it was cool, but he decided that he didn't want to have the burden of running it anymore. And so he ended up giving the domain name to Drakon Stein. I think the domain name is now under my ownership as of I think a couple years now. But so Drakon Stein needed somebody to build the new 2B2T online, and I really wanted to do it because I had just made that like 2B2T.reviews thing, and that was like kind of interesting. But I thought that 2B2T online could be a bigger thing than it was before. And I don't know, maybe we've done an okay job with it, or maybe we could do a little bit more. Um, but it's a place where people can submit coordinates and stuff, and it really helped me grow as a developer. It was one of my first projects that I took on while learning how to code.
Yeah, so now you're kind of at a different point with this whole Guardsman movement. What's been kind of what kind of sparked your interest in creating something new like this, and how's it been going? Like, what have you guys been up to?
Sure. Um, so I took a break from the Spawn Masons after being a little bit tired of some arguments that were going on in there. And I decided that it was maybe time to create something fresh. And so there are a couple people that I had been in contact with throughout my years in the Spawn Masons that never actually were able to become Spawn Masons. One of those people was a guy named Orsend, who I kind of co-founded the group with. But really, it took several weeks to come up with the basic concept that we liked, and we're still changing it, and we're not so sure about certain aspects of it. But notably, a part of the process were UFO crossing, the Dark Emperor, Henry, um, and myself, and we just wanted to create something that we thought would be fun, something that would bring players together in an interesting way that had its roots in kind of classic HermeticLock, you know, base making, where people can come to the chords, and if it gets griefed, it gets griefed, but we'll rebuild. And what really matters is the players that we have, and bringing Pop Bob into it, who now goes by Kenzie, was kind of a fun thing to do to make it go more or less viral around the community relatively quickly. But it's a really cool concept. We're having a lot of fun in it. It's very active, and we've got the same initiation type thing that we had in the Spawn Masons, but the difference is that it's like a little shorter and it's much more impactful, I think.
Yeah, and I'll put the Discord link in the description if that's all right. It's for
Yeah.
people to join if they want to. But how did you kind of come into how did you kind of bring Pop Up into this? Because that is kind of interesting. I know he's not much of a team player, or she. I mean, they. I don't know.
Sure.
Don't want to dead name. Don't want to dead name anybody here.
Right, of course. I'd been in contact with them for months before founding the Guardsmen through like another group that I'm in. Another group of like really great individuals. Most of them are like hacked client creators and other programmers. And so I had become close enough with Kenzie, which we'll use for now. Kenzie, during that process, not incredibly close, but close enough that we talked maybe once or twice a day for several months. Uh, and so that was kind of an interesting thing to do. And so we brought her in along with some of our other friends from that group. We're very happy with our very cute anime girls that we have in the Guardsmen. I was
God,
asked to say that in the interview.
Jesus Christ. So I guess to kind of round things off, we kind of hit all the topics. What are your, what are you thinking? The direction 2B is going to go in, possibly in the next year, the future in general.
It's really interesting. We all thought that it was going to die in 2017. It seemed like the popularity of the server and Minecraft as a whole was going down. I expect at some point in the next year or so, probably after quarantine and coronavirus and maybe summer's over, to see some decline in Minecraft as a whole. And 2B2T has been following kind of the popularity of Minecraft if you check Google Trends. It also depends on how much retention that fit can continue to receive on his channel, along with like Sal C1. So I think that the server is probably going to. I don't think it'll be as popular as it was a couple months ago, at least for a while. I think we'll see some decline in the short future. And then anything that happens next is really up to the YouTube algorithm gods.
Yeah, and what would you recommend to players that have found 2B2T maybe for the first time this year and you need advice on what to do?
Sure. When I first started off in the middle of the Rusher War, which, by the way, it gets memed about that it like wasn't super legitimate or real, but I can assure you that playing on the server in the middle of all of that, the Rusher War was like quite real. There were legitimate people on Team Veteran and Team Rusher that would kill other players if they didn't have a banner up at their base that matched the team's ideology. It was a really turbulent time. And I never expected as a new player to come out of that whole thing with my own group that the leader of Team Veteran would end up joining. And people like Bubba J and stuff. That seemed incomprehensible to me that I would talk to these people, these like quote unquote legendary players, as if they were normal people or like my actual friends. And so my advice is more than thinking about what you're doing on like the server itself, think about how you're interacting with the community. The best thing that you can do on this server is meet players that you enjoy playing with and surround yourself with good ones, because everybody likes to paint 2B2T as a really negative place, but it doesn't have to be. It totally depends on the players that you associate yourself with.
Yeah, I think that's some really solid advice. Thank you so much for being on. I really appreciated it. Yeah, if you have any closing remarks.
I think that's it. Feel free to join the Guardsman Discord. Lots of really interesting things are planned for the future. Thanks for having me.
All right, thank you.